The challenges facing the department stem from funding. The legislature dedicated all money we get from fees paid to lease rooms, to rent rooms at the state parks, to a fund that was designed to provide for the repair and maintenance of the park. Makes a lot of sense. The money you take in, you squirrel away, you use it to improve the parks and to repair things when they break. Unfortunately, this year the legislature took literally the entirety of that fund. It amounted to about $7 million, statutorily dedicated, and said, we're going to spend it somewhere else. That sent us reeling. And I argued very hardly to have that money reinstated, but it was not done. So we're now faced with that challenge. We don't have a fund to repair and maintain our state parks. We have carved out some of our other budget to deal with emergencies as they crop up and to make certain we keep things running. But when the pool pump breaks or when a toilet breaks, nobody wants to be in that room and nobody wants to be at that park in the dead of summer if they can't enjoy the pool. So that's our biggest challenge, convincing the legislature once again, just give us the money that you've statutorily dedicated for that purpose and let us do things right.
One thing we need to do is to promote the parks better. You know, in a lot of states, you can go onto a website, click a button, and connect yourself with all of the state parks in that state, so you can travel around the state. We've got to do a better job of promoting them. And we absolutely have to have a dedicated fund. But we also need to think outside the box. You know, in my parish, after Katrina, we couldn't build back the community centers. We didn't have the federal dollars we needed. So we reached out and got private companies to sponsor things like swimming pools that we have at all our community centers. So we need to think outside the box and look at other funding besides the taxpayers to fund some of these things at the state parks that they can promote and possibly do with private foundation money.
Thank you. So now this is my guess, and I'm watching the time. I know you guys need to get out of here pretty soon. Tell me a little bit about your position on voting on issues that affect you directly, like pay raises, for example, just as an example. If you're in office, how do those things, how should all politicians handle that?
Well, it disturbs me that politicians do vote pay raises for themselves. When you ran for the office, you knew what it paid. And I don't think someone in office should ever be in a position to vote on themselves a pay raise. To me, that's horrible. Now, if there's an adjustment needed and it's for down the road, but I think you run for that office, you know what it pays, you should accept that pay and do that job full time.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, particularly since you've accused me of grabbing a $30,000 pay raise. The legislature fixes the pay of our statewide elected officials. They did so long after I left the legislature. So I'm glad you created the opportunity to clear up that I didn't grab a $30,000 pay raise. In fact, I never voted for a pay raise for myself. When the legislature, over my objection during one of my terms in the Senate, voted for a pay raise, I didn't accept it for the remainder of my term. That's what you do when you're in public office for the right reasons, not trying to enrich yourself. And incidentally, another allegation that's been made is that I voted myself lifetime health insurance. False. I was not a part of the state group benefits system. So it is not correct, as you've seen in some commercials, to say that Jay voted himself lifetime health care benefits. Incorrect.
Had it passed, you would have been eligible for that. It didn't pass. The governor vetoed it.
I was not a part of the system, Billy. I wasn't in the plan.
Thank you. I like that last part. That's good, even though it wasn't on the agenda. Okay. No, it's perfect. It's fine. Okay, there's been a lot of debate about the use of out-of-state firms for ad consulting. Okay? Should we limit ourselves to in-state consultants even if out-of-state companies are cheaper and have a longer, better track record? And I would also add to this, please tell me what we, the little people in Louisiana, can do to have more knowledge about where our money's going. I mean, frankly, that's a problem for me, and I think the Tea Party.
Well, it's my turn.
I think it's, I can tell you, it's Mr. Dark.
Well, the answer to the question of what you can do to find out more, you know, we've had a great movement in the past several years with the internet and with government converting to systems that allow people to access information. There's an awful lot of information out there about state government if you go looking. on state government websites, on legislative auditors' websites, on our website and others. So there's a lot of access to gain information. Sometimes it's difficult to kind of pull it all together and know exactly what you're looking for, but if you're interested in anything in the operation of my office, you call me.
I will.
When you call my office, you're not asked, who is this, or can I tell him who's calling? I take my calls and I'll answer your call and I'll answer your questions. So that's an important component, I think, of government and what government ought to be about. So I think that's an important part. What was the other part of your question?
Yeah, let's go to transparency first, and somebody made a good point, it was 2 questions, I'll get that one next.
Absolutely. That's why by January 1, every dollar spent in Plaquemines Parish will be online. It's the only way, and I'm sorry, you do have to embarrass people and do the right thing. There's too much that we don't have access to know where the money is spent. A lot of times it's 3 and 4 firms hired in a row that are hiring another firm and another firm to do certain things that we don't have access to. So we need 100% transparency and know exactly where every dollar is spent.
You know, you
And
make
part of the-
I'm sorry.
This is the first part of your question I was going back to because I remembered what you.
Yeah, let me just say one thing real quick. I went to New York once a long time ago, and they had this thing called the shell game, and that's where they would pee, and they moved it. And next thing you know, there's not even a pee anywhere. Anyway, I can relate to that. Sorry, editorial comment.
Yeah, your other part of the question about out-of-state advertising
Yes.
firms or what have you, it's been very interesting because from the outset of this campaign, Billy has suggested that I'm spending money with a New York advertising agency and I'm spending $15 million or what have you with a New York agency. It's just completely false. When I took office, we had the Peter Mayer Agency out of New Orleans, Louisiana, under a 3-year contract with the department to do our advertising and marketing. That contract expired on June 30th of this year, so I put together a very extensive RFP program, involved 10 people within our office to screen applications, to make recommendations on who we would hire for very important contracts to promote Louisiana. We selected the Trumpet Agency out of New Orleans. We don't have a New York advertising agency. I do not have a New York consultant to promote Louisiana. They are Louisianans.
The firm that's putting up the billboards locally in areas where the people are offended that we're spending money on billboards is the Seafood Promotion Board, and it is a firm out of New York. And you can say, Jay, all day long, you don't have input in where that money or that contract goes, and we could debate that all night. But that's one of the shell games you're talking about. We can distance ourselves from it. It ought to not be a New York firm. It ought to be a local firm with local people.
You need to be running for a position on the Seafood Promotion and Marketing Board because they're two distinct, separate entities. You can say it as long as you want, but you can't hide the truth. I have nothing to do with it. If you don't like what the Seafood Promotion and Marketing Board is doing, take your complaints to them. I don't make their decisions.
That was 30 seconds if you want to take it.
Well, I'll just say, I promise you, if I'm elected, we won't be using a New York firm. Nobody that gets tax dollars will be sent to New York. No matter what board or how you move the shells, it won't go to New York.
Thank you very much. This next question, and we only have a few more minutes, is really, I think, appropriate from the discussion you just had. And it is, do you regret, and I always find this interesting because usually people say this is not a good idea, but do you, either of you regret the negative tone this race has taken or not? And why?
Not first.
I think Mr. Megas was first.
Sure. Well, I have 5 TV commercials, 3 positive spots showing what I've accomplished in Plaquemines Parish. $17 million surplus this year, re-elected with 71% of the vote. 2 of my commercials give out the J. Darden's record. And on every commercial, I've got the Senate bill and the vote. So you can say they're negative, they're factual. Now, if they're not factual, take them down, get them taken down. Cut and pasting, I will not do. And that's what's been done to try to tarnish my record.
You are the master of cut and paste. Everything that's said about me is incorrect, is misleading, is an outright falsehood. And in this race, people have the opportunity to compare. They have to look at the two of us, they have to look at our records, they have to look at our credibility and the message we're sending to the rest of the people. And it's very important for those distinctions to be made. And I will continue to note the fact that the FBI hadn't subpoenaed any of my records. I hadn't spent $175,000 on a film to promote a single parish. And those are the kind of comparisons
Well-
people need to make as they're judging who's the best person to do this job.
Well, first off, it was a sheriff that got the money from the council. I have a council government that controls the money, and we know where he's going. So it wasn't my video. That's a lie. Secondly, what was the other allegation? In the investigation, many parishes' records have been subpoenaed. Not mine, the Plaquemines of parish. And I wouldn't be running for office if I thought I did anything wrong. Secondly, your vote on abortion, and you said you made a mistake. The health care bill, where you said, well, I called the governor and told her to veto it. I talked to the governor. She don't remember getting that phone call. So, it's easy to stand up here and defend those votes or say why you didn't or didn't, or call them fees, increasing on hunting license, fishing license, every other fee. You can call them what you want, but they were increases that cost the taxpayers money, period.
Well, there's a distinct difference between a fee and a tax, and I think you know that. We're going to get into that. But let me just tell you, because maybe you haven't seen it, but I've got the contract bearing your signature committing the Plaquemines Parish government to $125,000 to pay for a 22-minute video that cost the taxpayers $175,000. I've asked you to give me that video. I want to put it on LouisianaTravel.com so I can promote your parish. That's what I'm in the business of doing. Let people see it.
It's a sheriff's video that the council approved him to do.
You
It
paid
wasn't
for
done.
$125,000.
I didn't pay for it, Jay.
Okay.
Jay, if that's all you got to run on,
I was on the contract.
I think that answers the question about whether we like contentious debates or what. I like complaining. That's what you guys do. I love it. Anyway, okay, this is probably gonna have to be the last question. And to me, I have mixed feelings about this. I'm gonna make it quick. The current governor, in many ways, he does things right. But it seems like we're selling every last thing in the state of Louisiana. I mean, we're just selling it off lock, stock, and barrel. Some people think these private-public partnerships are great. Other people think that it's a bad idea. So 2 minutes each. Tell us about your feelings on these private-public partnerships selling off the state's assets. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the legislature stopped the idea of selling off the state assets that was proposed, so that has not happened to the degree that was initially proposed. I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent to start selling state assets and privatizing activities, particularly like the prisons. I'm not convinced that the privatization of prisons is the way to go. I fought to recover money for the state when the Tallulah prison, which was privatized, became a Louisiana state obligation, a Louisiana state debt, when the bond commission that I was not on at the time approved it and was told it was not a state debt. That's the risky one when you create a private marketplace in the prison business. In my assessment, that was not an appropriate move, and I think it was probably good that the legislature chose not to do that. Public-private partnerships are a potentially good thing for the state if they're done properly. And for example, in our line of work in the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, it certainly lends itself to that because you have many people who are willing to invest private dollars and foundation dollars to support museums, to support the arts, to support state parks. And we've created opportunities for that to happen where those private foundations and donors do not control decisions, but they provide funding that lets us do additional programming in those areas. That's a prime example of where public-private partnership is a very good thing.
2 minutes.
we've got to cut wasteful spending, and we've got to do it sensibly. What I did in Plaquemines Parish is I put a team together to look at the parish budget. And because of those cuts and reforms, we were able to return $17 million surplus this year. You can't expect it to be done by the elected officials in Baton Rouge without some outside help, some people, some business people that take a true look, and where it doesn't get to committee and get killed, we've got to look at it as a package here. There's a lot of places in the state budget that we can save money, and we've got to do that. We've got to start there before we look at drastic moves like privatization or selling the hospital, the prisons. Well, we've got a lot of areas, but it's going to have to take groups like you sitting